Hello, I'm Nancy Kachingira. Welcome to Focus on Africa. These are our top stories. The agony following Uganda's mudslide. Survivors speak of how they escaped from the floodwaters.
The rain intensified and we had voices of people calling, "We are dying, we are dying." I picked up my youngest child and the other children followed me and we ran.
Opposition claims of irregularities and questions around soaring costs emerge ahead of next month's presidential election in Madagascar. Tackling migration from Africa. We report on a new initiative designed to stop people making the dangerous journey to Europe. Also in the program, it's a special sporting initiative that makes a social statement. How a wheelchair race in Kenya is helping to change perception around people living with disabilities.
Disability, it is not inability. We can do what other people do. We can race like all other peoples.
And in sports, a former sports minister in Kenya and the country's first Olympic gold medalist are expected to be charged over corruption allegations. Thank you for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News, and a special welcome to viewers joining us for the first time in the US, Canada and the Caribbean on the Africa Channel. Now, the Ugandan government says more than 100,000 people are at high risk of being washed away by another landslide in the Mount Elgon region in the east of the country. 43 lost their lives last week when a river burst its banks. It follows a disaster in the same region that killed over 100 people 8 years ago. Since then, there have been regular calls for people to be relocated to safer areas. And now questions are being asked about why so many still die from these natural disasters. The BBC's Patience Ataire reports.
Grief and helplessness. The people of Bududa district have been here before, too many times. A little girl and her grandmother lowered into the ground side by side. Last Thursday's landslide claimed 43 lives. Many remain unaccounted for. Esther Nambuba lost everything and is only lucky to be alive.
The rain intensified and we had voices of people calling, "We are dying, we are dying." I picked up my youngest child and the other children followed me and we ran. I was living with my sister and she tried to run too with her child, but the water carried her away. Fortunately, the child fell by a rock and survived. He's with me.
With 7 children to look after now, these relief items will come in handy.
Until last week, this was a trading center and home to many. And now people are coming from all the villages around here to see the extent of the devastation with their own eyes.
Road infrastructure was destroyed.
This footbridge is the only crossing point left for the villagers here. Some of them are heading to funerals or to condole with relatives who lost people. And it's the only point they can use to cross from village to village.
The country's leadership is now speaking in stronger terms, urging the people to heed the call to relocate.
Being near the flood, in the floodplain of the river or near the cliff is very, very dangerous. And then settling on mountain tops. So that agriculture loosens the soil, as you can see.
An elaborate relocation plan was drawn more than 4 years ago, but resources are yet to be found. 13,000 people were relocated to a different region after the 2010 disaster. These lush hills belie the disaster that is always imminent. There have been 66 non-fatal landslides across the region this year. The people of Bugisu refer to Mount Elgon as their mother. Though its rich volcanic soils feed its children, they have, on many occasions, served them sorrow. Patience Ataire, BBC News, Kampala.
Let's briefly now look at other stories making headlines across Africa. The Gambia has launched a Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission. Its purpose is to bring to light crimes committed during the 22-year rule of ousted President Yahya Jammeh. His reign was associated with massive abuses of human rights, ranging from torture to disappearances. The commission will carry out investigations for 2 years. Local authorities in Angola have confirmed that at least 180,000 Congolese citizens have crossed the border into DRC since October 1st. Both countries share more than 300 kilometers of border. Many migrants are saying they were kicked out despite having documentation to live in Angola. The reason for this sudden crackdown is unclear. Internet giant Google has launched motorbike mode on Google Maps in Kenya, making it the first country in Africa where bike riders will have the voice navigation service. There often aren't many signposts on streets in Kenyan cities and towns, which can make it hard for motorcycle taxis to pick up customers. Google already provides the service in Asian countries like India. The family of kidnapped Tanzanian dollar billionaire Mohamed Dewji says it will give a reward of $440,000 for information leading to his rescue. Mr. Dewji was abducted at gunpoint 4 days ago in Dar es Salaam. He is described by Forbes magazine as Africa's youngest and Tanzania's only billionaire. Police have arrested 30 people in connection with the incident. Next to an election. Madagascar heads to the polls next month to decide who will be the next president. Dozens of candidates have thrown their hats in the ring, but the former leaders behind me are the current frontrunners. At the weekend, 22 of the candidates held a joint meeting to denounce what they claim are irregularities surrounding the election. There are also question marks about its soaring cost in a country that's ranked as one of the poorest on the continent. Raisa Yusuf sent this from Antananarivo.
Madagascar's future could be in their hands. Next month, the people will decide who will lead the country. Candidates are campaigning hard to convince voters that they have the answers to Madagascar's problems.
We demand a cleanup of the voters' list because this election has too many irregularities. We've always been used to seeing the elections manipulated, but this year it's over.
The Malagasy people will come out of this poverty and corruption. The illegal export of national wealth will stop. The misappropriation of public funds will stop.
The three most likely candidates are so familiar to voters. They all have nicknames based on their former jobs. Eradona Mampian is also known as the accountant and is seeking a second term. Ange Radzoel is called the DJ. He seized power in a coup in 2009 and will be trying to attract younger voters to get behind him this time. While Marc Ravalomanan, known as the Milkman, was last elected in 2002. Protests and poverty dominate politics here, and yet Madagascar's polls are among the most expensive in the world. If no one receives more than 50% of votes in the first round, a second round will be held in December. Now it's time for the politicians to make promises and for the people to decide if they believe them. Raisa Yusuf, BBC News, Antananarivo.
Well, let's talk more about those elections with Emily Filou. She's a freelance journalist who specializes in Madagascan affairs and is joining me now in the studio. Let's first start with the candidates. So we can see some of the front runners. All of them have been presidents before, though. So what exactly will the people be using to decide who to vote for? What are the issues?
So the main issue, I think, for voters in Madagascar will be development. Development has been very slow. It took a real battering during the political transition from 2009 to 2013, and I think it has been a very slow comeback since 2013. So the forecasts are good for 2018. I think the economic growth is forecast at 5%, but that's the big numbers. I think if you look at the reality of the ground, poverty is still overwhelming, and so a lot of people will be looking at who might be giving them the best chance of, a better future, really.
And the cost of this election has also raised some eyebrows. It's one of the most expensive places to run an election. Why is that?
So there's probably two things. The first one is that Madagascar is a big country and it has very bad roads. The campaign period as well is very short, it's a month, and so to be able to cover any kind of ground in that amount of time with the infrastructure that exists, really you need to fly, and so candidates are left to, having to rent, helicopters or, private planes, and so that really sort of pushes up costs to run elections. Now, there aren't any sort of detailed breakdowns of how, so for instance, the figure that came out about the 2013 election campaign, $43 million, there is no breakdown of how that money was spent, but, there were some allegations about, vote buying and of, political elites who might, sort of influence or help, get
and that's
votes.
something the opposition is now raising concerns about
That's
again.
Right. Yes, yeah, and that's very much on the political agenda at the moment, amongst candidates and amongst civil society as well, who is trying to increase sort of transparency about sort of campaign financing.
So as these candidates are crisscrossing the country, what are the sort of messages they're sending out to people?
Well, at the moment, I think a lot of people criticize the fact that the message is a little bit light in terms of political agenda, that there's a lot of show, and that it's, the political message, the ideology is quite thin, and that it's more about the personality and the candidate himself. There are 5 women candidates, but the candidate himself, if you look at the front runners,
yes,
and not so much about the political agenda.
And so what would people want to hear, especially from the incumbent, for instance, because he's trying to defend his position? Will they look favourably at his performance so far, and would they look favourably at the performance of the other candidates who have been president?
So I think Eri Rajanimampianine, the incumbent, he is not very popular at the moment. I think a lot of people feel that, given that he's had 5 years, they expected to see more in terms of, say, infrastructure development, sort of investments in social services, an improvement in sort of living conditions for poor people. And so I think he'll probably be judged quite severely on this. In terms of the other candidates, I think there's a lot at stake for them. I think Marc Ravalomanana will want to demonstrate that when he was in power in the early and mid 2000s, he put Madagascar on a path. He had a plan, he had a vision,
right,
but then his successes, I think, sort of cost him dearly. I think Rajoelina will want to show that he is the genuine article, he is not a coup leader, and he can deliver on development for Madagascar.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Emily Filou, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
All right. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. With me, Nancy Kachingira. We've still got this to come. Kenya's Harambee Stars take a huge step towards qualifying for next year's Africa Cup of Nations. Peter will be here with all the details. Hello, I'm Nancy Kachingira. This is the top story this hour. As funerals are held for the victims of Uganda's mudslide, the government says more than 100,000 people are living in high-risk areas. Next, an initiative to help stop migrants making the dangerous journey from Africa to Europe, both across the Mediterranean and by land. Official figures from UNHCR show that more than 183,000 people crossed into Europe from Africa last year. Numbers this year are down, but many have still perished. So far, more than 1,600 people have died or gone missing while attempting the journey. At one point in April, 1 in 14 people who attempted the sea crossing died. So what's being done about this? The BBC's Ishak Khalid has been to Benin State in Nigeria to find out. The area is home to almost half of all Nigerian migrants making their way to Europe.
Communities like this are at the heart of Europe's migrant crisis. Nigerians top the list of Africans trying to make their way across the Mediterranean. And here in the south of the country, poverty-stricken villages have become hotspots for illegal migration and trafficking. We met a man who tried to get to Germany, but found himself imprisoned and enslaved in Libya.
Started whipping me on my leg, this is my knee.
He asked not to be identified.
When I came back, I just feel like killing myself anyway. You understand? Because there's no hope, nothing.
Are you willing to go back to Europe?
I prefer to go back, yeah. Because the suffering here is too high. The hardship over here, you know. Man, sometimes I feel, wow, maybe one day I will just find myself in Europe.
That's your dream?
That's my dream.
Many people from this village told us they were willing to risk everything for a better life.
Coming to a rural community like this, it's easy to see why people make the dangerous journey to Europe. Villagers here complain about corruption, lack of electricity, clean water, and most crucially, jobs.
But navigating the perilous journey to Europe is only the beginning. Human traffickers target migrants. We met a woman who was forced into prostitution in Italy. She was later deported back to Nigeria. Her dreams of Europe shattered.
You will stand on the street. The street you are standing, you are going to pay money for it. The food you are eating, you are paying money for it. What they want you to do is a slaving work.
With the help of Nigeria's anti-trafficking agency, NAPTIP, she has started a catering business with 2 other returnees.
With the glory of God, I'm moving on.
Helping migrants build a life in their home countries is key to tackling the migration crisis. Here in Benin City, returnees are on a 4-day EU-funded course to help them start their own businesses.
Now, what we try to do is to, give them a new lease of life, a change of mindsets. We orientate them back from the negative beliefs, the trouble they've encountered.
I lost my job, everything. So when they called me to come, I was the happiest person on earth.
The program has assisted more than 5,000 returnees, but it is expensive at $347 per person. The root cause of illegal migration from Africa is poverty. These initiatives can only address the symptoms, not the cause of the crisis. Ishak Khalid, BBC News, Benin, Nigeria.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's get some sport in now with Peter.
Hey, thanks, Nancy. And 7 senior Kenyan officials are expected to be charged over alleged corruption surrounding the 2016 Olympic Games. Those accused include ex-sports minister Hassan Wario and former Olympic committee head Kipchoge Keino, a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. Kenya's chief prosecutor had set today as a deadline for them to hand themselves in. Ferdinando Mondi sent this report.
Kipchoge Keino is one of the most respected sporting names in Kenya, and Hassan Wario, the former sports minister, is Kenya's current ambassador to Austria, but now they are both wanted men. Kenya's Director of Public Prosecutions, Nuruddin Haji, wants the pair and 5 others to answer to corruption-related charges in connection with one of the most embarrassing outings for Kenya at the Rio Olympics. Some of the offenses that may have been committed, according to a statement from the prosecutor, includes inflated air tickets, overpaid allowances, and embezzlement of funds meant to finance that trip. And during that period, the athletes in Rio had complained that they were living in deplorable conditions at the camp, as some of them did not even have enough kit. And also there was the presence of strangers. These were relatives and friends of officials who had no business being in Rio on taxpayers' money. Now, all these and a series of other embarrassing events were masked by the performance of Kenya, which was very good. Kenya won 6 gold medals and was the best ranked African team. But some say that the performance could have been much better had these athletes received the full financial support as had originally been intended and budgeted for.
Fernando Mondi there. Let's switch to football, but stay in Kenya. And coach of the national team, the Harambee Stars, Coach Sebastian Minye, has announced that hope is coming back to the country after they beat Ethiopia 3-0 in Sunday's 2019 Africa Cup of Nations qualifier. It means they are now 4 points clear at the top of Group F with just 2 rounds of qualifying to play and within touching distance of qualifying for their first Nations Cup in 15 years. Now, about 60,000 fans watched that game in the stadium. Ethiopia can also still qualify despite the defeat. Sierra Leone are in the same group, and their FIFA suspension means there are questions about their future in this campaign. Their qualifiers against Ghana at this international window were cancelled. Elsewhere, Guinea-Bissau came from behind to beat Zambia 2-1 and moved 3 points clear at the top of Group K. No Cup of Nations qualifiers today, but there are plenty tomorrow. In fact, 21 of them. Nigeria's game against Libya has been moved to Sfax in Tunisia for security reasons. Niger, seen here in training, are 8 points behind Tunisia, who they play in tomorrow's game. Their only point from their opening 2 matches came in a goalless draw against Swaziland. Their opponents, Tunisia, can qualify with a win. Morocco will be looking for their 3rd straight win when they host Comoros. The North Africans needed a 97th minute goal to beat the tiny island nation in the reverse fixture over the weekend. Comoros are bottom of Group B, having taken only 1 point from their opening 2 matches. Lots of football tomorrow. Get your football boots on.
Always lots of football, Peter. Thank you very much for all the sport. Next, we go to the eastern Kenyan town of Isiolo. They just hosted the Desert Wheel Race. It's a marathon race where all the contestants are in wheelchairs. The event is meant to raise awareness about people living with disabilities, especially in nomadic communities. The BBC's Victor Kanani reports.
Wheelchair racers, most of them from different pastoral communities in Kenya, gather at the starting line. This race bringing together men and women with varying forms of physical disabilities. While some were born with disabilities, others sustained lifelong injuries from accidents and illnesses. 17-year-old Leah Lesila had her leg amputated after suffering from cancer. Like other participants, Lesila is determined to conquer the winding 24-kilometer course. Sheer grit pushing her on, one hand pedal at a time.
I came to show Kenyans that disability, it is not inability. We can do what other people do. We can race like all other peoples.
It's a neck-and-neck competition in the race to the finish line. The racers sweat to victory amidst cheers from the spectators. During the 2016 Africa Disability Summit in Niger, Kenya was ranked first in Africa in the implementation of policies aimed at improving the welfare of people living with disabilities. However, organizers of this event say that pastoral communities lag behind.
I can say as a country, we have made some strides, but we are not yet there. But in the past, it has been very difficult for us as persons with disabilities. In fact, in Kenya, in the past, a person with disability, once he is born, they are considered as a curse. And birth attendants are given specific instruction to kill them at birth.
More than 100 men and women living with disabilities have participated in today's race. They have braved the scorching sun and now the rain in a show of defiance against societal stigma. In the end, winners including Lesile, who had finished at position 3 in the women's race, received prize money and trophies. The organizers hope that this wheelchair race will cross borders and become a national or even an international event. Victor Kenani, BBC News.
That's it for Focus on Africa today. Let us know what you think of the program. I'm at Kachingira on Twitter. Thank you and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.